the horse simply stopped. It didn't matter how much the old cowboy pulled the reins, nor how calmly he spoke, as he always did. The animal wouldn't take a single step further. In front of them sat only an old wooden bridge crossing a quiet river in the middle of the valley. It was a path they had traveled hundreds of times before. But on that day, something was different. The black horse raised its head, let out a soft neigh, and pawed the ground as if trying to warn him of something. "Come on, boy, what's gotten into you today?" the cowboy said, confused. But the horse wouldn't move. Seconds later, something happened that no one in that small town would ever forget. Something that would make everyone understand that, sometimes, God uses the most unexpected means to protect us. And when a curious boy decided to investigate the reason behind that strange stubbornness, he discovered something that could have changed everything. But before we continue this incredible story, subscribe to the Moments That Matter channel and stay with me until the end. Because what this horse did that day didn't just save a life. It might also change the way you look at the signs life places in your path. The small town of Willow Creek was the kind of place where almost everyone knew each other. Mornings began slowly, with the scent of coffee wafting from wooden houses and the distant sound of horses being readied for work. Among all the residents, there was one man respected by all. His name was Samuel Carter. Samuel was an old cowboy who had spent his entire life working the fields around town. He wasn't rich and didn't have many possessions, but he had something everyone admired, a calm heart and a silent faith. But the one who truly drew attention wasn't Samuel. It was his horse. A strong, elegant black horse named Shadow. Shadow wasn't just a working animal. To Samuel, he was a companion of the road, someone who had been by his side through good days and bad. Anyone who saw them together noticed something curious. It seemed they understood each other without needing words. For years, Samuel and Shadow traveled the same paths, crossed the same fields, and went over the old wooden bridge at the entrance of the town. There was never a single problem. Until the day Shadow simply decided that he would not cross. It was an ordinary morning. The sun was still low on the horizon, casting a golden light over the fields. Samuel was returning from a neighboring farm after helping a friend fix a fence. Shadow walked calmly along the dirt road, as he always did. When they reached the old bridge, Samuel gave a light tug on the reins. "Let's go, boy." But suddenly, the horse stopped. It wasn't a normal stop. Shadow locked his front legs and raised his head, staring fixedly at the bridge. Samuel frowned. "What is it now?" He tried to lead him again. Nothing. Shadow simply wouldn't move. The horse let out a low neigh and took 2 steps back. Samuel had dealt with horses his whole life. He knew when an animal was scared, tired, or stubborn. But this was different. Shadow seemed alert, as if he were perceiving something no human could see. Samuel looked at the bridge. It looked exactly as it always did. Old wooden planks, some creaking in the wind, but nothing out of the ordinary. Even so, the horse remained still. After a few minutes of trying, Samuel sighed. "All right, if you don't want to go, we'll take the long way around." It was a longer path. But Samuel trusted that horse more than anything else. He didn't know it yet, but that simple decision would change everything. That same morning, a boy named Ethan was riding his bike near the bridge. Ethan was 12 years old and known in town for 2 things: his infinite curiosity and his habit of asking questions about everything. He saw when Samuel and Shadow approached the bridge. And he also saw when something strange happened. The horse simply stopped. Ethan leaned his bike against the fence and watched. He saw Samuel try to lead the animal several times. But the horse wouldn't obey. That was strange. Shadow was known for being one of the most obedient horses in the region. A few minutes later, Samuel eventually gave up and took the other path. But Ethan kept staring at the bridge. The wind passed through the wooden planks, making small creaking sounds. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Even so, something about the horse's attitude wouldn't leave the boy's mind. Why didn't he want to cross? Ethan whispered. He walked slowly to the entrance of the bridge. He took a few steps onto the wood. The bridge creaked slightly. Still, it seemed safe. Or at least, that's how it looked. Ethan was almost heading back to his bike when he heard something. A sharp sound. Crack. He froze. The sound came from under the bridge. The boy knelt down and peered between the wooden planks. That's when he saw something that made his heart race. One of the main beams of the bridge was cracked. It wasn't a small crack. The wood was split down the middle, as if it were about to break completely. Ethan swallowed hard. If a heavy horse had crossed right then, the bridge might not have held. The boy stood up quickly. Now it all made sense. Shadow had felt something. Something no human had noticed. Ethan ran to grab his bike. He had to warn someone. Because if another wagon or another horse tried to cross that bridge, an accident could happen at any moment. As he pedaled as fast as he could toward town, one thought wouldn't leave his head. How did that horse know? And more importantly, how many lives had he just saved without anyone realizing it? Ethan pedaled as fast as he could toward town. His heart was racing, and his mind kept replaying the image of that cracked wooden beam. If that bridge collapsed while someone was crossing it, the consequences could be terrible. The town wasn't big. People used that bridge every day. Farmers with horses, delivery wagons, and sometimes even families heading toward the fields on the other side of the river. Ethan stopped in front of the small general store where a few men usually gathered in the mornings. Mr. Carter was right. Ethan shouted, trying to catch his breath. The men looked at him, confused. "What do you mean, son?" one of them asked. "The bridge," Ethan said quickly. "There's a huge crack under it. I saw it." At first, the men exchanged doubtful glances. That bridge had been standing for decades. But Ethan insisted. Finally, two of the men decided to ride with him to take a look. When they arrived and crouched under the bridge, their expressions changed immediately. The beam was badly damaged. One of them stood up slowly and whispered, "That horse, he knew." Within an hour, word spread across Willow Creek. The bridge was closed immediately. A few men placed wooden barriers at the entrance and began discussing how they would repair the structure. If Samuel Carter had crossed that bridge with Shadow earlier that morning, the weight of the horse alone might have been enough to break the beam. And if a wagon had followed behind, the entire structure could have collapsed. People began gathering near the bridge, talking quietly about what had happened. Everyone kept repeating the same sentence. The horse refused to cross. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others smiled softly. Because in small towns like Willow Creek, people believed that sometimes life sends warnings in unusual ways. And that day, the warning had come from a black horse named Shadow. Later that afternoon, Samuel Carter returned to town. He had no idea what had happened after he took the longer road around the valley. As he rode slowly through the main street, he noticed something strange. People were looking at him, and at Shadow. Some even tipped their hats. Samuel frowned slightly. "What's going on?" he muttered. When he reached the bridge and saw the wooden barriers, he stopped. Several men were standing nearby, examining the damaged beam. One of them walked toward him. "Samuel," the man said calmly, "your horse might have saved someone's life today." Samuel looked down at Shadow. The horse stood quietly, as if nothing unusual had happened. Samuel gently patted the animal's neck. "Well," he said softly, "looks like you knew something I didn't." That evening, Ethan found Samuel sitting outside the small stable behind his house. Shadow was nearby, calmly eating hay. The boy approached slowly. "Mr. Carter," he said. Samuel smiled. "Well, if it isn't the young detective." Ethan looked at the horse. "How did he know?" the boy asked. Samuel leaned back in his chair and thought for a moment. "You know," he said slowly, "animals pay attention to things we often ignore. The ground, the sounds, the small changes." Ethan nodded. "But sometimes," Samuel continued, "it's more than that. The boy looked curious. Samuel smiled gently. Sometimes life whispers to us, but we're usually too busy to listen. The next morning, people in town were still talking about the bridge. But the story had already begun to change. It wasn't just about a broken beam anymore. It was about trust. Samuel trusted his horse enough to turn back instead of forcing him forward. And that simple decision had made all the difference. Some people said it was instinct. Others believed it was something deeper. But everyone agreed on one thing. If Samuel had ignored Shadow that morning, things might have ended very differently. Over the next few days, workers repaired the bridge. Life slowly returned to normal in Willow Creek. But one thing had changed. Whenever Shadow walked through town, people looked at him with a little more respect. Children would wave. Farmers would nod. To them, he wasn't just a horse anymore. He was a quiet hero. And the strange part was, Shadow behaved exactly the same as always. Calm, loyal, and completely unaware of the story people were now telling about him. One evening, Ethan sat near the river watching the sunset. Samuel was standing beside him. "You know," Ethan said, "I think Shadow is the smartest horse in the world." Samuel chuckled softly. "Maybe," he said. Then he looked toward the repaired bridge. But the real lesson isn't about the horse. Ethan tilted his head. "It's about learning to pay attention," Samuel continued. "Sometimes the biggest dangers give us small warnings first. And if we're wise enough to listen, we can change the entire outcome of our story." Life works the same way. Sometimes the warnings are quiet. A feeling in your heart. A small voice telling you to slow down. A moment that makes you pause. Most people ignore those moments. But the truth is, those small signals might be the very things meant to protect you. So the next time life asks you to stop for a moment, don't be afraid to listen. Because just like Samuel trusted Shadow that day, sometimes the path that seems slower is the one that keeps you safe. And sometimes, the smallest pause in your journey can save you from the biggest fall.